instead of give you like a speech or like a presentation, we'd like to run a kind of like a chat. So I invited two senior cybersecurity professional consultants, Vishal and Nikhil. Rather than I talk about their detailed background, I will let them to talk about themselves for 1 or 2 minutes. So maybe Vishal, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me for this panel discussion. And yes, as Bryan said, I have been working in the cybersecurity industry for a while. I've been helping business ranging from small to medium size of companies and from big financial institutions like banks. And I've helped them develop their cybersecurity programs, conducting cloud security assessments, and third-party risk management. So that's my kind of strong area, and I'll be looking forward to present my thoughts and to answer whatever questions you guys you have for today's topic.
Excellent. Okay, Nikhil.
Absolutely. Hey, good evening and good morning if anyone's from Asia. Thank you so much, Bryan, first of all, to invite me. And secondly, sorry for this comfortable chair that I'm sitting on. This is the only quiet place in my house. Everywhere else my kid is running. It's a little bit chaotic. As Bryan just introduced myself, Nikhil Kaduskar, I have over a decade of experience in cybersecurity, heavily focused on strategy and risk type engagements, wherein I've worked with financial services industry, retail sector, as well as public sector clients, working through their information security strategy, all the way from nascency of identifying what the program should look like, assessing them on a periodic basis, and then deploying solutions. It could be either on the cloud security side or managed security solutions or GRC type solutions. So I worked across APAC, started my career in India, moved to US, and then finally my calling was to Canada. So that's when I moved to Toronto, and I've been here for over 4 years. And as Vishal said, look forward to hearing from you guys. Let's see what questions Bryan throws at us, and hopefully we have a great discussion today.
All right. Okay. So you hear their profound career background. They have years of experience. So now it's my turn to ask them some hard questions to test their knowledge and skills. Okay. So today we talk about secure a perimeterless business, right? So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this term. It's a little bit like a mouthful. It's hard to pronounce that word, perimeterless. So at the beginning, I just like to ask you guys, what does that mean? So what is a perimeterless business? So why that's important? So anyone, you want to give an explanation about this?
I can give it a pass. I guess the way I envision perimeterless and to understand what is perimeterless, I would like to go back to the traditional business world and what we used to always look as a boundary in an organization. Every time a business would set up their environment, their IT systems, there would be a defined boundary of your technology aspects, typically governed between your firewalls, which would protect your data centers, your assets. Even your employees, if you envision pre-COVID and maybe pre-2010, everyone's going into an office, sitting on your desktops, working through your laptops, connecting to your enterprise network through your firewalls to your data centers. And there was a clearly defined tiers or logical zones for your network by which you would define what is my perimeter, what are my assets which are inside my firewall, and what is outside my firewall. And what we started seeing over the last decade with more of a emergence of cloud technologies is most of your data center activities are now going to cloud. And this is specifically true for companies or businesses which are in the small, medium sector. They are now heavily starting as SaaS products, or they're looking at PaaS type platforms to deploy their capabilities online, and everything is cloud based. So that becomes your stage A for becoming perimeterless. Most of your processing is moving to the cloud. What comes as secondary is your users are now mobile. Your users are working remote. Your users are nowhere bound to a physical location. Everyone's on laptops or PDAs. That's not even a term. I'm dating myself, but mobile phones, and everyone's working remotely. That brings the second aspect of your perimeterless, because you don't have a geography anymore. And the third aspect that connects these two is, what's your network? Can you even say what is your true network? Everyone's outside your environments, And
Right.
there are some clients that we are seeing who are literally going to cloud-based firewalls, and they don't even have firewalls in their traditional data center. And that's what I would say is kind of a perimeterless business, where you don't have a clear geography, clear assets to position them in a facility, and
Mhm.
you're scalable, malleable across environments.
Wow,
Yeah,
that is a great definition.
yeah,
Uh,
and just to add to what Nikhil is saying, I mean, in simple terms, is we'll just replace the perimeter with boundary and sorry, border, and we can say borderless, right? So your network perimeter, that was your border, and now that wall is disappearing. And lots of startups, in my experience, that we have worked with, they are doing the cloud first and mobile first approach. So yes, they want their employees to work from anywhere, and they have their they are working in a co-sharing co-working space, so the network is shared. So as Nikhil said, yes, so the traditional definition of the perimeter, that is disappeared, and it's cloud first thing. So yeah, that's how I would summarize that.
all right. So thanks for the insights. One thing I keep hearing is a cloud, right? So
Mm-hmm.
which is change the whole landscape. Because for my case, when I started IT like back to 20 years ago, we are so get used to, okay, we need to have a check-in, check-out process for data center. There's a firewall. As long as after the firewall, behind the firewall, you're okay, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you need to log into the corporate environment, you either need to go physically, go to the corporation, or go through some like a VPN. Right, so that's
Right.
the world I lived for many years for the IT. But right now things change, right? So a couple of
Mm-hmm.
major technology like a cloud. So Vishal, you mentioned cloud first, cloud company. I guess a lot of startups and a small business, they are cloud based.
Right.
Doesn't matter it's a technology or it's a cost consideration. They are cloud based. So cloud change everything. So what do you think about cloud? How that impacted the security? Because one of the things cloud provider always says, come to us, we are more secure than your on-premise things. So
Mm-hmm.
is that just the cloud provider's responsibility to help us protect ourselves?
So sure. So I can start with that. So cloud overall, that's a shared responsibility model, right? And what do I mean by shared responsibility? So we have three service tiers: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and a software as a service. So across all three service models, we have the security responsibility is changing, right? What you as a customer are responsible for versus what the cloud service provider is responsible for. So
Mm-hmm.
to give you an example, if you are hosting a virtual machine in cloud, then you as a customer are responsible for applying latest patches to the machine, right? Fixing any vulnerabilities to the machine. But if you are going up and if you are using software as a service, then basically the cloud service provider is providing you a piece of software, and the service provider is responsible for the security of that the machine where the software is hosted. So that is one example.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I meant when I said it's a shared responsibility model. So and another point that you mentioned, that like moving to cloud, does it mean it's more secure? Does it mean it's less secure? So the way I see it is it's a definitely good, because if you are a startup company, then all the security controls, security features that cloud service providers provide, that you don't have to invest, you don't have to put initial investment towards setting up the infrastructure of those security controls, right? You are getting kind of share of the security controls that are provided by the providers. So in a way, that is good, that you don't have any initial upfront cost. And secondly, there's one kind of saying in cloud is, in cloud you basically configure your security, right? You are one click away from a security incident. So with greater responsibility of with greater power of configuration,
Yeah,
you have
okay.
greater responsibility.
Right.
So that's how I would summarize it, and that's how I would phrase it.
Yep.
All right.
Vishal, I like that Batman reference of greater power and greater responsibility. That's absolutely true, right? And Brian, sorry, maybe if you, I just wanted to put a couple of points here, right? One of the examples I wanted to add is clients when they start with the journey for cloud environments. I've seen clients starting with a SaaS environment and thinking, that's it, I got a product and my responsibility is done. There is still a sliver of responsibility that you need to maintain when it comes to a SaaS product. Even though you're getting a software which is inherently secure, you're still granting access to your users. You're still identifying what data you're loading on the software, who has access to that software. There are situations where financial service firms get invoicing tools, but end up releasing the access so broadly that users who are not authorized to see your invoices are seeing all client invoices. That becomes a security breach in itself. Even at every layer, there are security controls that as a business, you need to still be wary of. But as Vishal just mentioned, that you get, let's think of an 80-20 principle. If you are a completely new business, you start with a SaaS product, at least 80 to 90% of your security controls are covered. And the remaining 10-20% of security policies, governance, data access management are some of those icing on cake you can add as you mature.
Excellent. So the key concept I think you talk about really is a shared responsibility. So it's not like just 100% on the cloud side, a cloud provider side, or so you also need to take some of the like a responsibility, I guess, especially for the data related and and also the identity, right? So you have to protect your login ID or those kind of things.
Yes, and I mean, I can refer to one of the famous security incident that happened in past with a major financial institution, the Ceridian one, right? So sorry, not Ceridian, the Capital One Bank. So they were hosting, they were using AWS, but in the end, it was not AWS who was responsible, right? It was the configuration that the bank was responsible to secure. So I think so that's a kind of lessons learned from past, that yes, it's a shared responsibility model, and you are responsible to secure your data and secure your environment.
Right. Yeah. So you also need to work. So I view that is you need to understand what do you have, and you need to know how to use it. It's so powerful. Just like say what I do, I have a power tools, a power saw, all kind of things. It's capable to do a lot of things faster, but also dangerous if you don't use that properly, right? So with the great power, you carry great responsibility. The Batman things. Okay. All right. So. But for the small business or startups, right? So their mindset, I guess, a lot of times is focused on, let's say, technology startups. They focus on the features, the cool things, want to go to the market faster and quicker and also easier, all those things, right? So security usually is not the major, at least not at the beginning, their high priority. They probably think about that afterwards, the day before they launch their cool product. Anyway, so, but for the small business in general, how do they start? I mean, let's say they already deploy something on the cloud, or are thinking about going to deploy more things on the cloud. So how do they start? Like come up with, I don't know, we don't need like a fancy, like a complex security program at this stage, but at least what kind of minimum things they can do?
Absolutely. Vishal, I'll take it first and you can chime in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah? Definitely.
So I think that's one of the key considerations, Brian. The problem that security has always faced historically is A, we are considered at the end before you launch the product. And B, if you are even considered at the beginning, we come up with a list of 450 controls and you must implement everything. And if you don't secure and you don't bring the risk to zero, that's otherwise you are not approved to go live. And that's a myth that's continuously percolated across the businesses. The challenge that security has always brought to table is, how businesses look at it is an absolute security. But there is no absolute security. There is no risk zero. There is always how much risk appetite you as an organization have, and how much can you tolerate if you lost some data. So for any business which is starting up, you need to really determine what business you are in. Let's start from the top down. What is your area of expertise? Are you a financial firm versus are you a retail business, or are you an ice cream parlor sitting in downtown Toronto, which is selling some ice cream to users? You have to understand your risk profile based on the business that you are in. So that's your starting point. Once you identify your business set, your goals, that derives and identifies what type of risks you are going to inherit as part of your work. And this risk-based approach is what will give you the most fruits for your business in terms of securing your cloud environment, and not just the cloud, for any sort of business environment. So based on this risk-based assessment, you're going to identify, okay, here are my key business units. Maybe let's take an example. You are a bank, and you have most of your customer data, financial data, sitting on your Azure cloud for easy conversation, and there are CIAM type customer identity management products that you're using to grant access. At the onset, that becomes your target number one for most of users or most of entities who want to infiltrate your environment. That becomes your target one. So start focusing on those areas which are mostly public facing, which are customer data. High sensitive data is where you start with.
Yeah.
As you start going through a risk assessment, you'll get a strategy of what am I doing now, next, and later, and focus based on that particular plan. And to enable that, you need to also understand that there's infinite number of tools available out there in the market, but you have to start from scratch. You have to see what do you already have, what do you possess in house, which is, let's say, as part of the cloud security providers suite. So for example, Microsoft provides, as part of its Azure environment, it provides security center. It provides advanced threat protection capabilities inherent to the suite. So enable those. As it's as easy as flipping some switches on and creating some monitoring alerts and dashboards to ensure your environment is being monitored and is secure. So start with what you have, and then think of what else are you missing, which is critical, and start adding some capabilities as you go down the road. So let's not boil the ocean. That's kind of the bottom line I'll say here.
Yeah, so you have to understand where you're from, right? So understand the nature of your business and your customer and what kind of service you provide. All right. And in fact, I actually got a question from the group. I think the audience, I think that's a great question. So although a lot of times when we talk about this, because we don't know what's your scenario is, so we kind of give you the general kind of statement. So here's a use case actually sent from Indira. I think that's a great question. So let's assume there's a small business, right? So small business, they have a web service to sell some whatever things, right? So they also use Office 365 to manage their email, maybe like a Word or like a Excel, and also some like a business management tools. But those business management tools, they use a SaaS-based. They don't like install anything on their own environment. They use a SaaS, I don't know, maybe accounting, CRM, or whatever, like a cloud-based, like SaaS-based. So the question is, so within that kind of context, so how do they manage from a risk point of view? Because they are dealing with several providers. So from contract agreement part, how can they ensure their business IP or their clients' data are not kind of messed up with others, right? So when you have your custom data and your IP or documents online, you don't want to kind of in other people's domain or tenant, right? So how do you manage that? So that's a great question. Thanks for that question.
Absolutely, a fantastic question. Indira, thanks for the bouncer of a question that really keeps us on our toes. Yeah. The way I'll think, if you're looking at, this is underlying a problem of data. Before we start thinking technology or tools, you need to understand what your data is going to look like. Goes back to my statement. What is your business? What are you gathering? What information are you capturing? And also tying back to a little bit of GDPR type controls. Are you collecting the data which you absolutely need for your business? Are you retaining it only for the duration that you need to retain? And are you disposing it off when you don't need it? So that gives you the initial data governance framework, which tells you, am I collecting the right data? Am I segregating the right data, classifying it correctly? And am I using it for my intended business purpose? So once you've done that initial data governance aspect, that tells you the strategy of, is this my internal IP, which is highly critical? Let's say Coca-Cola's product, absolutely no one knows. I'm certain even Coca-Cola now doesn't know what that product is. It's already in the manufacturing process. So that's a tier one critical data. You need to safeguard it with multiple levels of control. At the same time, there would be data sets which are more public. And this is where the classification will help you. Is it highly confidential, restricted, confidential, or is it internal or public type of data?
Mm-hmm.
Those 4 categories itself will tell you a lot of options to securing your data. And then comes the tier of, is it internal data or is it a customer data that is going to be commingling with our environments? And that's where let's take an example of Azure. It's typically not that you're just going to have one data store to keep everything, and that won't be the right approach to work. If there's only one SharePoint, you're storing all the data sets, at least you would start creating folders in the simplistic format. So that's one of the approaches to plan out what are your internal data repositories, what are your external data repositories, and governance should be applied on these data repositories to start segregating your internal as well as your client information.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, so that's from data governance point of view.
Yes, and
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Bryan, to interrupt you, but yes, I would like to kind of take it from another angle where, I think one of the key word is contract agreements, right? So as a SaaS contract, SaaS agreements, what are the things to look for, right? And how do you ensure that your clients and IP are separated from others? So so from the contracting perspective, what you should be looking at is, number one, how the cloud service provider or how the software SaaS provider is securing their infrastructure, right? Like whether they have any independent like SOC audit done, right? So like what type of audits they have been doing, and are they certified for their security or not? And then again, what are the controls that you have put, or what are the controls are there in the contracts or agreements? So if let's say if there is a security incident that affects your data, then basically, will you be notified? Then within how much amount of time you will be notified? So those are the things that you should be looking at, and from your risk perspective. And again, the cloud is multi-tenant platform, right? So the technical way to address that is encryption. So if the SaaS provider is providing, let's say, a kind of encryption, bring your own key type of approach, then you can logically, you are isolating your information, you are encrypting it with your key. So that is a logical or technical implementation of isolation. So I think that's how I would see that.
Perfect. So Nicole basically talk about you start with kind of the data, you start with what kind of data you put on the cloud, right? So because there's so many providers, they offer you all kind of from application point of view or function point of view, like accounting, like CRM, like all those e-commerce website. But at the end of the day, what you really manage is the data. Right. So whether you really operate, produce, or maintain, or keep is the data. So data is actually the key to across all those applications. And with Vishal, what you mentioned is one is you need to do your due diligence about cloud providers, because you don't want to kind of go to any cloud provider. They claim, okay, probably they maybe only just have some like virtual machines put on that network, you go for them. But you need to kind of pick some like a well-known company at least, and also check their certification and at least understand more. And the multi-tenant, how do you manage that? And with that, there's actually related question, I think, from Sydney about, okay, so if cloud manage all my infrastructure, core business infrastructure, right? So sometimes because it's outside my control, it's somewhere not in my data center or in my house, right? So are they safe? How can the cloud provider guarantee they are safe?
Definitely. For sure, I can provide information on that. So the major cloud service providers, and this is related, this is in connection with the answer that I gave previously. So yes, the major cloud service providers, they will give you kind of their certification details in their portal, right? They will tell you, okay, these are the controls that they have implemented to safeguard their infrastructure, right? So that way, you can also go and look. It's on their portal. You can go and you can check what controls do they have now. And as we said, like, it's a shared responsibility, right? So it's not that they will be doing it 100%. Like we are saying it again and again, like you are responsible for it as well, right? Ensuring like access control, then encryption, and all those kind of key security controls. And that's why I'm highlighting more on encryption, because encryption definitely gives you that control, that ability to kind of to safeguard your own data, right? Irrespective of the environment. If your data is encrypted beyond your application layer, so that means when it is going down, it is storing at the rest, then it is encrypted. So if, let's say, if there is a malicious insider at the cloud service provider who gets your data, but it's encrypted, right? So again, from the cloud provider side, they have the controls. You can look out their controls, you can look out their security reports, and from your side, you can also implement some technical controls.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Vishal, that's great. I just want to focus on one of the key words in that question, and that's the word I always am careful of. That's the word called guarantee. And
yes.
in this day and age, you'll even if you get a Ferrari, you don't get a guarantee, you get a warranty, which is limited liability based on some considerations.
Yeah.
And it's just a wordplay, but that really matters when it comes to security. There is, as I mentioned, there is no absolute security. There is no zero risk. So you'd always have a negotiation or a layer of acceptable risk where you'll say, if this breach occurs and it results in $1 million losses, it's okay because I'm a $10 billion business. Or maybe it's a reputation loss equivalent to local newspaper. It's fine. I can still manage that level of reputation loss because there are other good things that are happening in my business to safeguard. But again, it all boils down to, what are you using the cloud environment for? What are the capabilities that you're deploying within the cloud environment? And that will tell you where are the areas that you need to secure, and what are if there are areas which are absolute security guarantee. In some cases, I've seen clients not to rely on public cloud. You'd rather set up your own enterprise cloud, which will give you the scalability and performance capabilities of a cloud environment, but would still be staying within your environments. Good and bad side of it, most of clients who go with it are very mature and they have strong security controls and experience in deploying their own cloud capabilities to secure their, it's kind of a data center, but you are getting that information in-house if you are so paranoid about security. There are some other reasons to have your own enterprise cloud, because you want to run some code which doesn't really scale well on public cloud. And there are other considerations to have, but that's kind of the area you start going into when you are thinking of absolute security or absolute control over your data sets and the security controls. Sometimes it's just better to go into your enterprise cloud environments and not necessarily go into public cloud.
Perfect. And also back to the quest, I think one of the points you mentioned at the early stage, really understand who you are, what are you doing, right? So what's your business and the security requirements are. So that will help you to draft what kind of risk tolerance or what kind of strategy you can put there.
Absolutely.
Great.
And just a quick example here, and then taking Vishal's point, right, around data encryption. Sure, data encryption is something you absolutely need to have. But if you look at some organization, let's say a retail organization will be happy with today's encryption levels, which could be like AES 128, or it could be RSA 2048 keys. But you start going towards, let's say, federal government of the US or the Department of Defense, they won't be happy at AES 128. They are going to think of, what are my encryption controls which would be not broken by quantum computing? And they are now thinking of 10 years down the road, what would happen to my data which is stored on some cloud environment? Mm-hmm. And that also brings that different layer of saying, what are you doing? Are you a retailer who's selling some clothes online and the data will be anyway thrown out in 2 years? Or are you Department of Defense, which really wants to keep the Navy's UFO video secure for 40 years, even when quantum computing comes online?
Perfect. All right, cool. So yeah, so also I appreciate people ask questions on the using the chat function. So great questions, and just keep coming. So we don't want to make that as like a script kind of panel discussion, because although yes, we prepare some questions in case you don't ask questions. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. I think that's a fresh and actually really test our cybersecurity consultant here, because they have all kind of scenarios. You want to give them hard questions. Just so keep coming. All right, so I guess let's do a little bit deep diving. All right, so we know a general cloud, so it doesn't matter it's AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. So let's say I'm a business owner, so I have all my things on the cloud. I'm a cloud-based, cloud-first, perimeterless business. Okay, so take a little bit details. What kind of security controls I can have? I know generally they would like a cloud provider would do, but what kind of controls I may access or my team may access or I need to pay attention to?
Right.
It could be
So
from any domains. Yeah.
Definitely. And again, as what Nikhil was saying, adding in the same line of thought, I think the very first thing is having a roadmap, right? Security, I mean, AWS, if you count the number of services, there are what, 100 plus services. And if you count like a number of core security services, then still they have a good number of core security services. But what we are really looking into is like number one, I think the first very basic principle is keep it simple, right? Like you don't want to use too many security services so that like you in the end you also will get confused and you will have your more resources kind of utilized for that. So I think I would divide that in like, let's say 30 days plan and 90 days plan and going onwards, or it's 30, 60, 90, whatever the organization or business prefer. So in the first one, the very basic thing is identity and access management, right? So irrespective of the cloud provider, a couple of basic things like your root account or your super admin account through which you are subscribing to the cloud service, you have to secure that. So that is like keys to the kingdom, right? So what controls can you apply for that? So number one, like have a complex password policy set, right? Password is rotating every X number of days. Then you have multi-factor authentication enabled. So that is taking care of your root account. And then having a proper role-based access control setup in your environment. So what do I mean by that is based on your business, your employees' roles and responsibilities, you try to mimic the same structure in your cloud environment so that you based on the principle of segregation of duties and less privilege, so that you are at least achieving if not same level, but if not like higher security, but that same level of security in cloud. So IAM, that's a key component, right? And then again, turning on the logging, because that's number one thing. So that is part of your 30 days plan. So it's like you enable your logs so that any activity that is happening in your environment, that is getting logged. Monitoring, that will come in the later on, like the 60 days plan. So, but at least you should make sure that you have logs enabled. And then again, so IAM, then logging, and then data protection. So based on your requirements, start before you start putting your data, at least identifying like what are your encryption requirements, right? The fourth one is your network or your cloud architecture. So what traffic is allowed, what traffic is not allowed, how you will configure those. So the key principles will remain same across all three or big three cloud provider. What will differ is the implementation. Like they may have a different terminology, but they all provide features, they all provide security control to limit the traffic or to kind of filter the traffic, right? So those kind of things are like in 30 days plan. Then you go to like 60 or 90 days plan where you are doing the advanced thing. So you are implementing privilege identity or privilege access management, right? You're implementing processes such as every time an admin wants to do something, you have another person who approves the request. So at least you are aware of that. And then you have security monitoring. So you are defining your use cases, like what security activities you will be monitoring for. So, I mean, this is not kind of a complete list, but at least it is something that you can start with, and based on your roadmap and your maturity, as you grow, you can add more security controls.
Okay, perfect. I like what you said. Not only you gave highlight some important domains like IAM, like network encryption, but also you gave the timeline. you gave like, okay, what's your first for the 30 days? Because yes, there are so many things you need to take care of. But what's the priority? What's the sequence? Or what if you don't have a unlimited resource? What kind of things you need to pay attention first.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
great. Nicole, any comment on that?
Well, Vishal took away all my points, so my
Okay.
cheat code is no longer useful. But I would double down on those
Yeah.
because if you also read through, let's say, any of the cloud providers' recommendations, the key things are like multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
That comes up as a number one identity control.
Right.
At the same level, I'll say RBAC. It is very hard to
Mm,
define a scalable role-based access control
mm,
matrix. Most of the clients, most of the companies end up with a model which is good for day one or maybe day 100. But the challenge happens when you're growing and you're now 1,000+ company and you don't know who's doing what. The biggest problem is either someone's getting more access than they need to because you
mm,
haven't refreshed the role-based access controls, or someone has moved across organization and now what we call as the role access creep. They have access to the keys to the kingdom to a certain degree. So RBAC is really crucial. When it comes to networking, I'll just add few salt and pepper there. Vishal covered most of the aspects, but start with your virtual network, see what your network boundary looks like, and start subnetting it in a proper mechanism wherein you have enough logical tiers. And this goes back to how you segregate your data versus your client's data, your business IP versus client data, right? Subnetting is one of the measures to do that. Define your SQL databases, let's say, in one subnet, and your applications are in a different subnet. So you can create flows or data flows which allow specific applications to only talk to that subnet or that database. And what typically happens is every of these controls, let's say you are in a PaaS model, you get PaaS firewalls, which tend to be overlooked. Your SQL database for itself will have its own PaaS firewall. Typically, everyone looks at the NSGs or network security groups, the subnets, and they call it a day. But think of the PaaS firewalls, which help you protect that individual asset and lets you control what sort of data flows are going to be acceptable. So those are the types of controls. I'll just double down on what Vishal said.
mm,
That's kind of your 30-60-90 plan,
mm.
and goes back to how you see your data. Where do you store
Right.
your data, and how do you start from there?
Excellent. So people ask, what is a PaaS firewall?
Oh,
So
Uh,
yeah, maybe just I'll
uh,
elaborate. Yeah, go ahead, Vishal.
or yeah, no, sorry. So PaaS is platform as a security, and
As a service.
we can. Sorry. Yeah, platform as a service. I've been in the security world, so yeah, platform as a service. And one good example is AWS. AWS services, database services that they provide. I think RDBMS, right? So as Nikhil said, you have the database security groups, which will basically allow or deny traffic from that particular database. So that's what we meant by PaaS firewall.
okay, cool. All right, so I think we cover quite a lot of concept because I know if people are familiar with cloud technologies, those quite a lot of things are like a basic you have to consider anyway. But for people who are not that familiar with the cloud, there are probably some keywords there. We need a more clarification. So for today, because the time limit, we cannot go through all the details. So feel free to connect with us and talk to the speaker, Nikhil and Vishal are all experts in these domains, and reach out and find out some if you have any question, you can follow up. So we mentioned actually two things. We talk about shared responsibility because within the cloud, there are a lot of controls. It could be native from Azure or AWS. They put all those security control, monitoring, security center, all those things, right? But there are probably two things you still need to manage as a user. Number one is your identity, right? So your login, doesn't matter if it's MFA or your phone, right? So still you need to manage your identity. So IAM actually is a very, very important, it's an old topic, but right now become more and more important, especially for cloud, across multiple domains and multiple clouds. Another one, actually, we haven't touched on that. I saw some people post the question already. It's an endpoint, right? So
that's it.
You connect to the cloud, you have to use some devices to connect to the cloud, right? So even it doesn't matter, it's your phone, iPad, or your tablet, or your laptop, or your desktop. You need to that's the endpoint. Kind of how do you ensure the security for the endpoint? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Very, very key aspect to consider, right?
Yes.
In our entire cloud environment discussions, we always focus on the cloud side because that's more exciting. But the number one risks do come from your endpoint itself. And this ties back to how do you monitor your endpoints? Uh, all your users, everyone's connecting through your laptops, or let's say even in an endpoint situation, there are servers can be considered as endpoint, but let's talk specifically of the laptops, desktops, and the phones. Sure, there is the anti-malware suites, which is a standard. You talk about hardening the devices. And when it comes to hardening, I'll give you an Azure example. Azure gives a good capability with its Intune capability, which helps you do mobile device management. You define a set of policy, you define a hardening script for your desktops, and you would run those scripts to ensure that the laptops or desktops are limited to do only the certain activities that is required for that device. These are policies controlled by your Active Directory. They would be pushed by Intune, and you secure your environment as a standard image build. So every laptop you get in, let's say you're not allowed to go to Facebook, or you're not allowed to watch any movies on that laptop, for example. What software do you run? Is it a whitelist or a blacklist? And that gives you a degree of control at endpoints. And that's only what I call a preventative control. The other side is kind of a detection and response, and where the EDR type tools are coming into the market. Think of CrowdStrike, Carbon Black. These are one of the leading brands right now in terms of endpoint protection platforms. There are many more, depends on what businesses need. But what these give you ability is there is a lot of AI enabled automation and preventative controls that they put on the systems. But at the same time, they very well integrate with your SIM products. SIM are your monitoring devices, which sit in your security operations center. So these SIM environments would help you detect incidents that are happening on endpoints and let you remotely either block those actions or let you manage those incidents in a way that it reduces the harm to the broader network. So that's the second detection and response type of controls which are coming up in the market very well. And that's something that absolutely every organization needs to now think of as part of their overall monitoring capability, as well as the cloud environments.
Yeah.
Vishal, what would you?
No, for sure. What I would like to highlight the fact that endpoint. I mean, you have to secure it more compared to your traditional environment, and the reason why is your network or your perimeter security controls. They are no longer at like you don't have a perimeter, right? So your endpoint, that's where you have to. It's more like endpoint centric security. I would rather say that. And yes, preventive controls, detective controls, right? Preventive, Nikhil, yes, anti-malware, then advanced threat protection. So before I kind of give out any product names, I'm not advertising or giving my giving the product. It's just basically from my experience, I've come across these products. So there are products like Azure has, Microsoft has. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protections, which kind of combines lots of these capabilities into one, right? So it does like vulnerability scanning and another one is EDR. Then it also looks out for like threat indicators in your endpoint. So there are tools which are doing kind of a mix of all the things that Nikhil mentioned. And again, one of the things that I have seen across the companies are integrating your endpoint products with your cloud CASB, so cloud access security broker. And with that gives the capability to control what traffic goes out, comes in to your endpoint. So that is like the next level, the advanced, one step ahead security solution. So yes, that's I just wanted to add that angle to what Nikhil already mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think one topic, if I may add, that we should be looking at is also email security, because email is another vector by which the attack may come into your environment. And when I say environment, that's technically your endpoint, right? So just wanted to highlight the importance of email security as well.
Yeah, so talk about that, the phishing email, the things, right? So a lot of people think, okay, I move things to the cloud. So, but if there's a term called social engineering, and one of the social engineering, one of the famous way to do social engineering is through the email, the phishing email. So if you click something, then probably you'll get a malware downloaded to your computer, which depends on what kind of malware or what kind of things they plan to do, right? So that will impact on your endpoint and potentially also impact your identity, right? So that's the key area. So with those two at the hacker's hand, they will turn that around to your cloud environment. So anyway, we can anywhere like any solution we can protect us from phishing email. Like any insight there?
Yeah, I can talk a couple of bits on that, right?
Yeah.
Phishing, as I would say, is what targets the PB-CAC problem. And I expand that to say problem between keyboard and chair, which is the human aspect. So I love that term because most of the times you call IT support and they say, have you turned off the laptop and turned it on, right? That's the number one test because they think it's always a PB-CAC problem between keyboard and chair. And how much ever technology controls you may add in the environment, end of the day, your number one risk comes from the human aspect of it. We cannot be up to our best security monitoring game 24/7. And even within security practice, we are always nervous. Maybe I kept a password which is very weak, or maybe did I click a link which is incorrect. The human aspect is always at play. So there are technologies that you can deploy. So for phishing, let's say Office 365 itself comes with very solid anti-phishing kind of capabilities. They do their own monitoring. All the emails get scanned and filtered. So spam filters are really advanced now, and they are AI enabled. No longer are they just searching for keywords, but they look at trends. They look at what domains it's coming from, what sort of IP addresses did they originate, what is the context, is it typically the type of emails this individual receives. So there's a lot of AI aspect that goes into spam management. On top of it, there are products which allow you to test your users from a phishing standpoint. So you create your own fake phishing emails and send to your test audience and see how many click. And if they click, they get this nice invitation to attend additional training. Or if they click 3 times, they get invitation from the HR to say, what are you doing? So there are technology controls that you can always deploy, but I always gravitate towards the number one control for these is training and awareness. You have to ensure and continuously propagate this, that security is everyone's responsibility. It is not just because a security assessor is coming that you have to show your passwords are strong, but you need to keep your password hygiene. You need to keep all the security hygiene up at all the times. And that always falls back to training and awareness.
Perfect. Yeah, so at the end of the day, although we talk about identity as a perimeter or network as a perimeter, at the end of the day, really, it's people are the first and the last perimeter.
Yes,
so
that's true.
You can do perimeterless, but you cannot do peopleless.
That should be our next topic, right?
Right, that's so true. Okay, so we kind of getting closer to our panel. It's time flies. Okay, so 1 hour pretty much gone. I actually have one last question, actually from one of our audience. So more from the career perspective, because cloud is very hot right now, and cybersecurity is hot, right? So cloud security also very hot, and many people want to either tap into this professional or explore some career opportunities there. But the problem with many people, like really is, we can learn something. We can read from paper and read some like a tutorial online, watch some video. But the big concern is the practical experience, right? So how do as a person, like I'm interested in cloud security, how can I get some like a practical experience to develop, to put my hands on something to do things? So I just want to hear your insights.
Sure.
Good, Vishal. Yeah.
No, I think the best thing, the best thing to do is to get your hands dirty, and by that it means like as you are learning things, go practice your skills in the cloud environment, right? I mean, there are good resources available in the market, which will definitely help you learn the cloud security stuff. But as you're highlighting that, learning something and doing it, that definitely adds value. But I think what is missing is more kind of guided, practical training type of thing, right? So I think that may be one of the path that the interested person can take right? So yes, like there are tons of materials available, but again, at the end of the day, you may come back to the same question. Okay, which material to kind of choose, right? Like I have
Just
so many
too much,
materials.
too
There's
many.
yeah, the problem of too many. But so
Mm.
again, more kind of guided practical learning. I think that will definitely set the path for future.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give my own example. And not going 10 years ago when I started, I was thrown into cybersecurity, and that's how I started cybersecurity. But my example around over the recent years, right? Like as security technologies evolve and overall technology evolves, I started my journey to start learning AI and machine learning. That is completely a new domain for me. But how do you start? And that boils down to saying, what are your strengths? What are you good at? And what are you currently doing? Start focusing on those areas. So for me, it was cybersecurity. I've been quasi good at, and I put air quotes because I claim I'm good, but people don't say that. So, but that's one of my only strength areas. So start looking at your own fields. And what I started doing is, let's take risk assessments for an example. How can you put machine learning to risk assessments? How can you automate some of the risk assessment features? Instead of a person doing it, can a voice model do it? Can Google Now or Siri do risk assessments for you? Start thinking on those. And what I started from doing is, how do you do machine learning? What are the tools available? So understand the basics of machine learning, the initial few models, learn what different types of models are, and pick up a language. So I picked up Python, and I started learning Python on my own, just looking at Udemy or other platforms. I'm not selling Udemy, but that was the platform I chose, and start learning a course and start applying that learning to what you are doing today. So taking another example, if you are a developer, start implementing the OWASP top 10, which are your top 10 vulnerabilities in any code. Start reviewing those, apply that to your coding practices, and you'll see that your code goes through security much faster, and you don't see any vulnerabilities or penetration testing results pointing fingers at your code. That gives you a practical experience of your own field, and it also demonstrates to your own immediate supervisors, or let's say your colleagues, that you understand security, and that gives you within your own jobs kind of a flair which says, hey, this is the guy or girl who knows security, and let's work with this person as our security champion. That gives you a career segue into cybersecurity.
Yeah, and just one thing to add there is learn from peers, right? Like learn from those who has done things like that, and maybe you get a mentor. There are people out there in the industry who are willing to provide guidance to people who want to kind of progress their career in cloud security. So do that, like attend talk like or meetups like this, right? So that way you are expanding your network. You are knowing like what worked for someone, right? And what if maybe like the same thing, it can work for you as well. So you may be starting on a path which is kind of proven. So I think, yeah, learning from others, that's another big thing.
Perfect. All right. That's great. I can see all those great insights about how to learn, right? So my thought about that really is you need to learn with a purpose, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of purpose, but a lot of times the problem is you just passive to learn. So you read, but you cannot apply it. So when we talk about the practical experience, you really need to apply what you learn to something. So in our, because for people know me, I also running the Cyber Career Center. Our philosophy, actually, we run a lot of experiential learning. So in fact, I can share with you my background. So Vishal knows that we just finished one cloud security experiential learning. So the key part we emphasize is we call it a learning DNS. So learning by doing, learning by networking, and the learning by sharing, or kind of like a teaching, right? So you need, if there's no immediate purpose, at least you need to create some purpose for that. So it's kind of give you the feedback. So encourage you to learn. Otherwise, you just, okay, for the sake of learning, it's meaningless. You have to tie that with something to demonstrable and also collect some feedback. Another part is if you can learn with a couple of others together, as a team effort, that really helps you to go. Also, if you get a mentor, that's even greater. Okay, All right, so we can talk more there in another topic about cloud and virtual learning things. But anyway, okay, I think we are kind of getting closer to the session. And is there any other like a last minute question? I think for people, I think we cover most of their topic. So there's a one related to PIM, privileged identity management, privileged access management. I think we kind of covered that one. It's related to identity and access management, but this one is related to the privileged users. Speaking of time, we cannot go too much detail there. We want to finish that, honor the time. All right. Okay, so so for Nikhil and Vishal, any last minute comment before we finish today's session? So
I think we got we got one more question. I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What certificate is critical to acquire?
What certificate? I mean,
do you mean cybersecurity, or do you mean the cloud security, or can you? I don't know who also Jesse or cybersecurity certificate. Okay, cybersecurity certificate. Which one is most valuable?
Yeah, so
be
my
careful about
viewpoint
that answer.
Yeah, I know it's a very sensitive answer. No, but my personal take always on cybersecurity certifications is focus on the ones that gives you immediate experience, right? So let's say you're working on any platform. Let's say you are a networking admin today. So let's do certifications around network administration. Don't think only of cybersecurity, but think of the fundamentals of networks, and that will give you the experience for cybersecurity. If you're doing some risk assessment type work, you can start thinking about the C-risk type certifications. But at the bottom line, if you look at my profile, I just have 2 certifications. One was mandated by my previous company, and the second was quasi-mandated to go to the next level of my career progression. So I'm not a believer in certification. I'm more of a believer in learning. So if you already learned things, you automatically can pass those certifications. But I understand sometimes as you're starting your career, you want to demonstrate you have the interest. So some of these certifications like C-Risk, which is a bit advanced, but gives you the risk management capabilities. CCNA type certifications, which show you the network administration capabilities, and CompTIA certification around the fundamentals of security would help you get started if you are really interested in jumping into cybersecurity.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, I would like to add, I also agree with Nikhil, and I'm also in the same boat of like not a big fan of certificate, but having a certificate definitely kind of helps you navigate the career, right? So, but having said that, and the important aspect is how much practical experience or how much practical learning you have, right? So, and what are the ways to demonstrate that? Certificate is one. Another one is, let's say if you are a developer or if you're writing a security tool, then publishing the tool to the open source community, right? You don't have to be like 100% correct in your first shot, but you can at least try publishing your stuff to the bigger audience, right? Another one is writing article, right? So that shows your thought process, that shows your kind of problem solving skills with the tools. So having a certificate is definitely one thing, but if you can do like other things, then I think that it shows more practical experience, and that will definitely kind of give you more kind of weight over the certification. But yeah.
Great. Because I can relate it to that for the development world. So there are a lot of certification for the developers as well. But oftentimes we don't care what kind of certification you have. Show me your GitHub, show me your code, show me the project you did, or the website or application, show me the diagram, show me the architecture you built and your consideration.
Yes.
So, all right. Anyway, but the certification also important because it reflects your commitment of learning and the knowledge you get, but that cannot replace your practical experience for sure. All right, so come to the end of the session. I like to ask our audience, do me a favor, give our 2 amazing speakers a virtual applause. I know you cannot speak, whatever you put there, just to give them a virtual applause.